Stories Philippines podcast.
A cold wind rises through the dark halls of power. It slides without warning, suffocating and heavy. Imagine a midnight where you sense 1,000 silent witnesses, all pressing close around your shoulders. The sort of night that presses on your chest and whispers a warning. What happens when justice fails? Not just for the living, but for the dead. There are stories whispered in government corridors, arguments echoing in stained wood chambers, and lives broken by events that most would prefer to forget. But tonight, none of that remains hidden. Tonight you must listen not only to the living, but also to voices that refuse to rest. Let me caution you. The shadows of this episode fall across scenes and themes that some listeners will find deeply unsettling and disturbing. Proceed with extreme care. I am Jessica, and you are listening to Stories Philippines podcast, Season 3, Episode 9, The Silent Vote of the Dead. Find show notes and support options in the description. Access exclusive content on Patreon. Submit your stories to our email, storiesphpodcast@gmail.com. And don't forget to follow us on social media for daily folklore facts. The impeachment bid that gripped the nation in late August and early September 2005 was a moment that promised change. Instead, it became a lesson in helplessness. The impeachment complaints, meticulously stacked and fiercely argued, were deemed insufficient in substance by Congress. Votes flickered across party lines. Hope rose and plummeted in minutes. In the chamber where the final decision was announced, some said the air became suddenly colder, and shadows thickened in the corners, as if old wounds had reopened silently for all to witness. But the real story never just belongs to one room or one verdict. In the heart of the archipelago, especially in small towns carved out of jungles and rice paddies, elections were more than paperwork and ballot boxes. Each vote carried years of fear, betrayal, and payoff. Whole families waited for results that would tell them if their neighbors, friends, or even their own flesh and blood were part of the machinery that suppressed their reality. There is a legend, part folklore, part rumor, about ghost voters. Kamalakal, a town whose name is rarely marked on maps, became infamous not only for cheating death but for keeping its dead on the voting lists. Each election day, as the sun dipped low and doors slammed shut, spirits appeared in living rooms, at kitchen tables, by gates and windows. Some were bruised and battered victims of past violence, others weighed down by disease and regret. They showed up not for the living, but to cast a vote for the very people who had wronged them most. One widow, Dimpna Tessalona, retold stories of being beaten by the apparition of her husband on Election Day, her bruises following the same routine he had performed in life. She believed she would never escape his grip, neither through law nor through time. Other families saw their departed in distress, split between households, incoherent, and suffering as on their final days. Richie Reyes faced his mother every election day, forced to confront failed attempts to heal her before cancer took her. These spirits, it was said, returned year after year because injustice was never laid to rest. Stories submitted through Spookify crack open the daylight facade of ordinary homes. A message shared at 2 o'clock in the morning describes a chilling feeling, a sense that some beings remain in the house, watching, taunting, intervening with reminders that certain things, certain memories, never fade. Some nights, the presence is so strong that electronics flicker and people freeze, helpless to resist. One user described reading until exhaustion, only to see a woman in a white dress appear on their phone and refuse to disappear. Others share how footsteps linger in empty hallways, and how objects, even as ordinary as electric fans, turn unexplainably, always facing doors as if expecting someone not quite alive to enter. The suffocating sense of helplessness that accompanies election fraud is a mental horror with real, embodied consequences. Experts might attribute this pervasive dread to mass anxiety, breeding collective hallucinations or psychosomatic illnesses. But in Filipino culture, the physical response, the goosebumps, the chill, the quickening of breath, is evidence of something more. It's a belief that the spiritual world remains close at hand, especially when justice is denied. This isn't just a local superstition. In many cultures around the world, specifically in Latin American nations or parts of Africa where political violence is a recurring tragedy, the deceased are often believed to retain a civic duty, a right to vengeance, or a simple lingering resentment that manifests during key political moments. The idea that the very earth remembers an unjust killing, and that the spirit of the victim is tied to the site of their death, is a thread woven through countless global histories. Sometimes it's in the buildings themselves. Malacanang Palace, the seat of power for generations, is thick with stories of movement in the shadows, doors opening on their own, and chandeliers swaying for no apparent reason. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. himself recounted ghost hunts with friends, midnight escapades ending in screams, and music played loud enough to chase away invisible eyes. Security guards and staff know the feeling of being watched, especially on formal staircases late at night. It is as if the nation's history itself refuses to be quieted, especially once innocence is stripped away by the machinery of politics. The palace stands as a kind of historical echo chamber, a place where generations of intense, high-stakes decisions and human suffering have left an undeniable residue. What does it mean when the dead bear witness to the failures of the living? In Kamalakal, after decades of using the votes of the dead to install dynasties, one night, the living and the spirits joined together. The town, haunted by too many losses, rose up and stormed the compound of the family whose rule would not end. The ghosts emerged with families, children, and kin, and the violence that should have followed dissolved, replaced by a frozen understanding. The deepest horror was realizing just how invincible corruption could be, how even the mob was powerless to change what had already become tradition. The legend of the ghost voter touches a nerve deeper than simple fear of a haunting. It speaks to a fundamental breach of the sacred contract between the governed and those who govern. In the Filipino worldview, the concept of utang na loob, a debt of gratitude, is central to social fabric. When politicians abuse this cultural cornerstone, demanding loyalty beyond reason, the resulting injustice is not just legal, it's a profound spiritual wound. In the Christian faith, which permeates the Philippines, the failure to secure justice for the dead is often seen as condemning the soul to an earthly purgatory. Unresolved grievances mean spirits are not resting peacefully in the presence of the Almighty. The refusal to find the truth, to prosecute the wicked, is essentially an act of keeping the gates of heaven closed for the victims. This religious lens magnifies the horror. The living, through their political inaction, are actively trapping the dead. It transforms a political failure into a spiritual disaster. Consider the history of the Katipunan, the secret society that led the revolution against Spanish rule. Their struggles were rooted in a demand for justice for their dead, martyrs executed for daring to dream of freedom. The very foundation of the modern nation is built on the bones of those who were politically wronged. Their memory, their ghosts, were invoked as rallying cries for an entire generation. This national memory ensures that the concept of the politically motivated haunting is never far from the surface. The ghosts of the Katipuneros, those who fought the Spanish and the Americans, are just another layer of the atmosphere. The geographical layout of Kamalakal offers a chilling parallel. It is a remote, river-cut community, hemmed in by ancient, sprawling rainforests. The town itself is built on an old Spanish-era cementerio, a burial ground relocated hastily during a mining boom in the 1980s. The soil is dark, mixed with clay and perpetually damp. The houses, built quickly and without proper foundation, are subject to constant shifting and settling, creating an auditory landscape of creaks, groans, and structural noises that the locals simply refer to as the neighbors adjusting. This constant noise makes it almost impossible to discern a natural sound from a supernatural one. The air here smells permanently of damp earth and the faint coppery scent of the nearby river. One family in Kamalakal, the Mabini clan, lived directly over what was believed to be the heart of the old cemetery. Their home, a crumbling two-story structure of chipped plaster and corrugated iron, became a focal point for the hauntings. Eliza Mabini, the youngest daughter, a vibrant girl of 17, began to exhibit strange behaviors leading up to the 2004 election. She would speak in the language of an old Spanish-speaking woman, ranting about land titles and stolen gold. Her movements would become erratic, and she would scratch cryptic, dated symbols into the dusty floorboards. Her father, a foreman at the local sugar mill, was convinced the spirit was a 19th-century landowner whose grave had been disturbed. On the night before the election, Eliza reportedly stood at the kitchen table, her eyes wide and blank, and began to write a list of names. Names that had been on the voting registry for decades but were known throughout the town to be dead. She wrote them in elegant, flowing script, the hand of someone trained in a strict convent school. When the list was presented to the local election official the next day, it matched the registry perfectly. Eliza, who had never seen the official document, had produced the full roster of the silent voters.
This incident highlights how folklore and political reality become inextricably mixed. The ghost voter is not just a mechanism of fraud, it is a spiritual placeholder for the erased, the disenfranchised, the forgotten. The political system, by allowing the dead to vote, essentially affirms that their human rights and their very existence are still being manipulated even after death. It adds insult to injury. Your oppressors own you not just in life, but in the afterlife as well. This phenomenon is not isolated to the Philippines. Globally, the idea of the political ghost exists in different forms. Think of the desaparecidos of Argentina, those disappeared ones, whose bodies were never found. Their families hold vigils not just to mourn but to demand a body, a grave, a physical proof of death, because without it, the state retains the power to deny the event ever happened. The ghost voter and the disappeared share a common thread. They are the unfinished business of a cruel regime. They are souls held in limbo by a political structure that refuses to acknowledge its own violence. The sense of dread that permeated the impeachment hearings in 2005 was a national manifestation of the same local horror. The country watched a televised ritual where truth was placed on trial and found wanting. The collective fear was not of a sudden violence, but of a slow institutional erosion, a realization that the rules themselves were rigged. This realization, according to some psychological studies on collective trauma, creates a state of derealization, where the world around you feels suddenly unreal and hostile. It's a waking nightmare where the foundations of society feel illusory. The goosebumps and cold air that many reportedly felt in the legislative hall were perhaps the physical manifestation of this collective psychological shock. The church, the constant companion in Filipino life, attempts to offer solace. The sacrament of reconciliation, confession,
is a pathway for the living to unburden themselves of their sins. But for the sins of a nation, for the systemic corruption that enables the ghost voters and the denial of justice, there is no quick absolution. The clergy often speak of a national soul that requires healing, an open wound that festers with unresolved history. They teach that the only way to truly lay the restless dead to rest is not through exorcism, but through truth and accountability. Until the living right the wrongs, the dead will continue to walk.
In 2005, an invisible force crept into the heart of the nation's capital, pressing against marble floors and echoing down legislative corridors. Millions who watched the impeachment drama unfold from afar believed for a moment that justice could prevail. But as the complaints were rejected and truth buried beneath legal language, the country fell into a sleep thickened by fear and silence. The dead, martyrs, victims, ordinary souls erased by violence or heartbreak, cried out for justice, reminding everyone that the vote is not only a civic act but a spiritual reckoning. The story of the ghost vote, whether a genuine paranormal event or a cultural metaphor for deep corruption, serves as a powerful reminder. The consequences of political malfeasance do not end at the grave. They extend into the realm of the spirit, poisoning the memory of the dead and terrifying the lives of the living. It is a haunting that only genuine justice can silence. Tonight we return to that night, and the nights that followed, to trace the slow, stubborn spread of this haunting through neighborhoods and networks, through homes where families traded hushed conversations for the morning news, through classrooms where teachers told stories in softer voices. We follow the trajectory of a single vote, recorded on paper, tabulated in private, then denied in public, and watch how that single act ripples outward. For some, it was an administrative footnote. For others, it was the hinge on which a life turned toward ruin. For the relatives of those who died under suspicious circumstances, for whistleblowers who felt the floor of protection give way beneath them, that vote was an indictment, not just of policy, but of conscience. Remember the faces that flickered on live television, the weary prosecutor, the defiant accuser, the stone-still legislators whose ballots would decide not merely a political fate, but the shape of national memory. Those cameras caught more than proceedings. They captured the electric charge of a society at a crossroads. For a fragile moment, the court of public opinion felt like it might correct the course. But legal technicalities hardened into barriers and bureaucratic language smoothed conscience into complacency. The machinery of power reassembled itself, and the city exhaled a long, weary sigh, one that sounded suspiciously like resignation. In the weeks and months that followed, rumors and folklore braided with fact. Stories of flickering lights in deserted offices, of voices heard behind closed doors, of ballots placed in empty chairs began to multiply. Some whispered that, just after midnight, the assembly chamber would seemingly seat someone who had already been declared dead. Others swore they watched a ledger rewrite itself. Whether these episodes were hallucination or metaphor, they conveyed the same aching truth. Unresolved wrongs refused to rest, and those who wielded authority without accountability had left a spiritual vacancy that demanded filling. Communities felt the change most keenly where grief and injustice met. Mothers mourning sons killed in chaotic raids carried photographs to vigils and found the photographs returned to them altered, as if someone had rearranged the faces. Neighbors once friendly grew distant. Conversations stopped at the edge of what could be said aloud. Fear reshaped public life,
not just in the immediate sense of reprisal, but in the longer erosion of trust that makes civic engagement feel futile. Schools, markets, and parish halls bore witness to a quieter violence. People stopped speaking names. Names are how we remember people. When we stop speaking them, we begin to forget them entirely. Yet the ghost vote did not simply terrify, it also galvanized. Grief turned to ritual in the small acts people took to keep memory alive. Midnight candle vigils, mural painting, clandestine pamphlets slipped beneath doors. Poets and protesters reclaimed streets. Lawyers, relatives, and investigators lit legal beacons in courtrooms, refusing to let the official language bury the lived truth. Where formal remedies failed, communities built their own systems of remembrance and resistance. Each public obituary read out loud, each witness given a voice, was an antidote to the slow rot of forgetting. The haunting also began to surface questions that are seldom asked loud enough. What does it mean to be represented when the ballot box itself becomes a site of betrayal? When the machinery of state refuses to answer for blood, what spiritual obligations do the living hold toward the dead? If the sacred promise of "we the people" is broken, who is responsible for the repair? The institutions designed to enact justice, or the communities that hold memory close during long nights?
Across time, the ghost vote took on different forms. In some retellings, it was literal, a phantom presence sitting in a speaker's chair, a phantom ballot appearing in official records. In others, it became a symbol for the legalistic erasures that allow perpetrators to pass unpunished. Both versions carry the same aching lesson. Unresolved injustice breeds a sense of displacement in a nation's collective soul. The dead, once reduced to numbers on a docket, reclaim personhood. They insist, with whispers or with thunder, that a vote is not merely a civic checkbox, but a sacrament of accountability. When a vote goes missing or is stolen, the moral ledger shows a debt owed not only to the living, but to those whose lives were cut short. We should not mistake the ghost vote for only a tale of despair. Like all hauntings, it contains within it the possibility of transformation. Hauntings are demand letters from the past, and if the living have the courage to answer, they can become a source of healing. Justice, in this sense, must be broader than trials and verdicts. It requires reparative acts, formal acknowledgments of wrongdoing, reparations where possible, institutional reforms, and public ceremonies that restore names and stories to the record. It demands that truth be told fully and loudly, that archives be opened, and that the ordinary rituals of civic life, voting, mourning, memorializing, be reclaimed from those who would hollow them out. Tonight's episode asks you to imagine what justice could look like when the living truly hear the dead. Could a legislature pass laws that more carefully guard the integrity of votes and hold officials accountable? Could independent commissions be created to reopen cases closed under suspicious circumstances? Could communities be given resources to maintain public memory, archives, memorials, legal aid, so that the dead are not forced to become ghosts in order to be noticed? There are also quieter, more personal forms of justice. Families demand truth, sometimes for decades. Neighbors ensure that anniversaries are observed. Teachers put names into syllabi so that future generations know who was lost and why. These acts create a fabric of refusal against erasure. They transform sorrow into testimony. As the hour grows late, consider the moral geography of our civic life. The ghost vote teaches that every procedural failure is a moral wound. When we glance away from abuses of power, we risk making complacency an accomplice. When we normalize legalistic evasions of responsibility, we allow a culture of impunity to flourish. And when institutions fail to correct course, the burden of memory shifts back onto ordinary people. Submit your stories to our email, stories.phpodcast@gmail.com. Find show notes and support options in the description. Access exclusive content on Patreon. Follow us on social media for daily folklore facts. Tonight, reflect on what it means to be haunted, not just by apparitions, but by the long shadow of ignored suffering. Ask yourself, what justice can the living offer to those whose lives were undone by power? What accountability can be crafted so that a ballot's sanctity is protected even after the voter is gone? What happens when a vote cast by the dead carries more weight than a promise made by the living? Listen for the small sounds. The rattle of an empty chair. The whisper of a name read aloud. These are the reminders that memory persists. These are the cues to action. The dead demand not simply retribution, but recognition. They want the record to reflect what was done, to name the harm, and to formalize remedies so that the debts owed do not fester. The living must answer with institutions that are transparent and humane, and with communities that refuse to let silence stand in for justice. As you leave tonight's episode, I ask again, do we ever really bury the past? Or do we simply wait for it to rise again and take its seat among the living? If the past can return as a vote, insistent, incorruptible, and morally binding, then we must ask what ours would do if the dead could cast a ballot today. Would our choices honor them? Or would our silence condemn us to listen to their complaints for generations to come? Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Do not forget to like, subscribe, follow, and share this podcast. Support the podcast financially in ways you can find in the show notes. Thank you for listening. Good night.